You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is Mr. Preddy.
Hello, Marshall's right here.
And Senor Bell.
Hi, Michael Bell.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. We are watching what, Michael?
Today we are watching and discussing 1991, The Last Boy Scout.
So I saw this movie once prior to this viewing in the theater well after it came out, because that was back in the 90s when movies would actually hang around for about 2 months. I saw it in 1992 and had no particular interest in seeing it. Saw it the one time. I have never seen it again since. It didn't hit in my top 10, I'll put it that way. But Michael, you were very hot to do this movie, and so I'd like you to discuss the context in which you first saw it.
I saw this movie on the weekend of January, my birthday weekend in January in 1992. So I turned 17 years old. The movie had been out for probably a couple of weeks, and so this was going to be like probably the first time I slapped down my driver's license and bought a ticket to an R-rated movie, like legit as a 17-year-old. And nobody wanted to go with me. I remember standing outside my buddy's house, knocking on his window, going, "Come on, man, I'm driving. Let's go." And he didn't want to go. It had nothing to do with the movie, I'm sure. But I ended up going to see it by myself. Like nothing was going to stand in the way of me legitimately walking into an R-rated movie, which, let's face it, it was a lot like when you buy your first drink when you turn 21. It's a formality, if anything else. If it's not, I'd certainly seen R-rated movies by then. But I went, I saw it, I enjoyed it. It did everything that I sought out for it to do, which was be rated R and actiony and all of that stuff, And I got, when it was over, I came back and of course I told my same group of friends, "You should have gone with me. This movie's amazing. It's got everything." And we had a really solid dollar theater in the neighborhood. So once that movie kind of moved over to the dollar theater, we were able to go see it again and again and again. So I probably saw Last Boy Scout in the theater in 1992 a half a dozen times. And then it came out by the time it came out on VHS, we were like, this is awesome. Now, our dollar theater was excellent. It was like a regular movie theater. It was clean. We could get there. It was just far enough to drive that it felt like we were really driving. And so there were several movies of this era that we got to see in the dollar theater over and over and over again. T2, Army of Darkness, things like that. And so for me, Last Boy Scout slots right in with a bunch of those when those are fun, just like guys hopping in the back of whatever beat up car we had and driving down and getting to see it. And as a result, the quotability, I think, of Last Boy Scout folded into who we were really quick. So we were walking around quoting this movie just as people do other things pretty early on, so.
Marshall, did you see this in the Greater Spring, Texas area when?
I didn't. I actually saw this at my mom's house on video. And I'm like you, it was like, so that was probably the one and only time I ever saw it until recently when I watched it again. Mm-hmm. And I watched it again because a competing podcast had a episode on it, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go back and I'm going to rewatch this. But what's interesting is I did not see it nearly as many times, Michael. I saw it once. I have very strong memories of the movie. And just because I had a very strong, and we'll certainly get into this, I had a very strong reaction to the movie. In 1992, I don't want to say I was a movie critic, Marshall. That really wasn't me. I had strong music critic vibes, but I wasn't strong. I didn't have strong opinions on movies at the time. But this was one of those cases where I just had a very strong reaction to the movie. And so it's stuck in my head for reasons that I think are clear. We'll talk about why. It's very, very memorable, even if you've only seen it once. But it wasn't a good reaction that I had. And so it was until recently I went back, I was like, well, I was sort of, heard that podcast and sort of re-examining I was like, do people like this movie? I was like, that was surprising to me. Apparently they do. And so, that's something we can talk about. But I saw it, I was 17 too. I re-rented it on VHS at my mom's house. That was not uncommon. That was a good evening of fun when I was that age. And I was just, I had a strong negative reaction to the movie.
So my memory is I had a very negative reaction to the movie when I was 17, but that's all I remembered. I remembered nothing about the plot at all. I remembered they had a football sequence at the end and football stuff happened during the film. But it all felt very loosely tied to the actual story that they were focusing on. And my real memory of it has nothing to do with the movie. Was I had a friend who Marshall knows who had one arm, who we had gone in the afternoon to go pick up his new artificial arm and got to the movie. And halfway through, he turned to me and said, my arm is stuck on the chair. And at the end of the film, I spent 15 minutes in the theater freeing him from his chair and removing his arm from the chair where the robot hand had clasped to the handle of the chair. And so that was really my only memory of The Last Boy Scout. And frankly, my memory of it this time isn't great, as I was making my way through a few cocktails as we watched the movie. But I'm going to still try and hang on with you guys on this. Michael, we've recently been doing, we're now sponsored by a company called South Coast Media out of Houston.
Fascinating.
Texas. Yes. And so now we do the South Coast Media plot synopsis, and I'm going to pass those honors off to you today.
I'd be happy to attempt to sum up the plot of this movie because there's a lot of it. And
there's a lot of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of plot. Suffice to say, The Last Boy Scout is it is a story that is set against a fictionalized version of the NFL. And the movie opens with it's halftime during a game. The home team in Los Angeles is losing. And a mysterious voice on the phone calls one of the star players and says, he threatens him that he better start scoring some touchdowns. And the player takes a bunch of drugs, sticks a gun in his waist, goes out on the field, runs a play, ends up shooting everybody on the field, gets to the end zone with everyone standing around, the police and everyone, as this terrible thing has happened. And he commits suicide on the field. And against this, we also meet up with our hero, our quote unquote hero, Joe Hollenbeck, who is played by Bruce Willis, the lightning hot Bruce Willis sort of part of his career. Although, as we can discuss later, he has recently dealt a pretty serious blow to his career. And but this is post Die Hard Bruce Willis, and he is he's a private eye alcoholic, total bum, the kind of characters that he has really leaned into quite a bit. And he ends up teaming up with another football player who's played on this team. There's a bit of, he takes a bum case to follow this woman, this stripper, who has some guys hassling her, and her boyfriend is played by
Damon Wayans.
Damon Wayans. He's an ex football, professional football player. These two don't get along. Damon Wayans doesn't understand why somebody is being hired to protect his girl, and without getting too granular on it, the woman that they are both concerned with is murdered in the street, and very quickly they are thrown into a buddy cop comedy action like only the 90s and late 80s could give us, where they're all over Los Angeles, corrupt cops against the backdrop of corruption in football and government and gangsters and gambling, and so forth, as they attempt to solve whatever the hell is going on in the actual details of the plot.
Yeah,
I feel like that's as much as I can really say about
it. I think that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, no, pretty good.
How would you describe it, Marshall?
Well, I get into this a little bit because this is kind of where I have some problems. So Corey is played by Halle Berry, is the sort of exotic dancer. She's the girlfriend of Damon Wayans, ex-NFL player. And she is trying to blackmail the team's owner, the Stallions owner, into basically letting her boyfriend play football again, because he didn't. I think he was caught up in a gambling scandal. What was a very public gambling scandal, right? And sort of is booted out of the league, basically, whatever, this sort of non-NFL. And so she's trying to get him back in. And so she discovers and I think that the two guys after the fact discover that she was blackmailing the owner to do that with an incriminating tape. We never learn what's on the tape, but an incriminating tape that supposedly sort of captures Sheldon Marcone blackmailing Senator Boehner, and basically he wants to get gambling legalized. And so this is the conspiracy that's set up, and the two of them set out trying to solve her murder and resolve that conspiracy. So that's the main thing. And so once they get involved, it sets off a series of other events that, as you said, resemble a lethal weapon type movie, which is not an accident, because this convoluted plot comes to us courtesy of Shane Black, the scriptwriter who's the ace and very famous scriptwriter who's responsible for the Lethal Weapon franchise as well.
Yeah, what's happening there? What's happening there is the owner of the football team, Sheldon Marcone, is paying senators. He is paying senators under the table so that they will vote to legalize sports gambling outside of Las Vegas and Atlantic City. They want to legalize sports gambling across the board. And in order to make sure this happens, he is buying off senators. And I believe that what is on the tape is him trying to buy off the senator. And the senator wants more money. He wants more money than anybody else. And so Corey, the dancer, has a tape of this conversation or of this transaction. And so she is going back to the football team owner and trying to blackmail him into letting her boyfriend back onto the team. And instead, this gets her killed. And anyone else who might be aware of the existence of the tape that she possesses is also getting killed.
Mustache guy.
Bruce Willis gets brought into our story because his buddy / partner, another private investigator that he works with, throws him the tip and says, "Hey, I can't take this case. Why don't you take it? It's just protecting some chick." And he also gets killed. His car explodes and so now everyone who is kind of around this is getting killed. And this is what forces Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans to sort of team up, because now people who are important to them on either side cars are exploding and machine guns are being fired all around them. And so they're trying to figure out what the connection is between all of this.
And I think what is important, I mean, there's a bunch of things. This is one of the more convoluted plots of any movie I've ever seen.
Yes,
I mean, it is very plotty, but the backstories of these two people, like Jimmy Dix was the best, basically the best player in the NFL before his gambling undid him. And of course he was addicted to pills and had all this, he's playing through pain, addicted to pills. And
he has a tragic story.
Yeah,
his
he has
family
a tragic.
Has been killed.
His family has been like a ridiculous number of awful things have happened to Jimmy Dix, and the same thing really happens to Halle Berry. Halle Berry has a very weird and convoluted, but also famous backstory because he is a man who once saved the president's life. He's a former Secret Service agent and military man, and he is subsequently disgraced. And this is the backstory. He's subsequently disgraced when he punches out Senator Boehner, the same Senator Boehner who's now at the center of this bribery conspiracy. He had previously punched out Senator Boehner, and because Senator Boehner was not just having an affair with a woman, but brutally assaulting and abusing this woman, and she's screaming, and he walks in and punches her out. So that is the backstory to this, and he is now disgraced, not because all of that, but because he punched this guy, and basically he's out of the Secret Service. And
which, by the way, I want to say, like, I did not buy.
No, that's one of a number of very implausible things that happen in this movie, and it is really part of my problem with the movie. And I will just say this, that I think that this podcast this came out of a larger discussion between me and Mike about the relative merits of this movie, and we can talk about some of the central reasons I had a big problem with the movie back then, not now, but back then. Like I had memories of this movie just basically, not like, and it's not that it's implausible. It is implausible. Basically all action thrillers are implausible. It's that it is implausible on a scale that is amazing. It's like it is mind-bogglingly implausible on a scale that is frankly ridiculous. And I think I've seen is, reading reviews and sort of going back over the critical reception of this movie and the way it's been thought of over the years. That's either a flaw or that's either a feature or a bug. For a lot of people, I think this is an incredible film because of how over the top it is. And for me, though, the way it started was so ridiculous that it really ruined the rest of the movie for me.
Yeah.
The movie is probably most famous. I want to start with that first scene because that first scene is what people remember because that
first scene is so memorable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I was watching it this time and going, I remember being basically this movie lost me with this scene when I was 17. And as I was watching it this time, I was like, why was that? I was like, well, one, they're playing football in the dark, which I don't understand. Two, why would you be bribing the offensive player or threatening the offensive players, the defensive players who have to get out of the way so he can score touchdowns? You can't magically get someone to score more points. It feels like it was
the worst. Yeah, the worst player to throw the game is the running back on the offense. Yeah.
And I don't know if that was what bugged me when I was 17, but watching it this, I was like, they're terrible at being gangsters. Like they've gone to the wrong person. You go to the coach, you go to, the referees, you go to the defensive players. The one person who has no control over all this. Of course, that's why in the scene he pulls out a gun and starts shooting his way down the field. But that's clearly not the outcome that these guys, the people who are blackmailing him want. So, but I know that this is a classic scene, and I'll let Michael speak to it.
Yeah, our football player, Billy Cole, he is played by one-time fitness guru, Tybo legend, Billy Blanks.
Billy Blanks.
So this was actually my first, I don't think Tybo existed when this happened. So this guy was Billy Cole. And then one day I saw Billy Cole on my TV getting a bunch of house moms to work out.
Great footnote.
Yeah, but excellent. Right. So I am not going to be able to explain whether or excuse whether this is the best way to throw a football game or any other such thing, other than to say the people who are threatening Billy Blanks on the phone are within the organization. And so, and we're going to hear later on from Jimmy Dix, likewise, why does he have a drug problem and so forth, right? And it's because the pressure that is coming from the front office is so intense for them to play through the pain, for them to so forth. And I think things that are probably relevant to a real conversation about football are happening there. So, whether how much gangsterism is involved in what happens with Billy Blanks, I don't really know, because he's obviously addicted to PCP, or whatever drugs he's taking there. He's pushed to his total limit. And the voice on the phone tells him that he had better start scoring some touchdowns.
Which, by the way, the commentators say he's already been having the game of his life as you get into that scene. So he's already scoring touchdowns.
The owner of the team, Shelley Marcone, is going to say that.
Yeah.
What game are you watching? Billy Cole's out there having the game of his life.
Yeah.
And so you've got a phone call behind that essentially is saying it's time to back this up. But regardless, I think all that means to be communicated there is the culture of the LA Stallions, really is what's happening here, and how intense and how pressure filled this fake NFL is. We can get into, why they're playing at night, why they're, why these things are filmed the way they're filmed and so forth.
I think it's
Friday Night Football. Bill Medley sings it for you at the beginning.
Amazing opening credits. It's one of my one of the best opening credit scenes I've ever seen, and definitely one of the things in favor of this movie is how spot on a parody of Monday Night Football this Bill Medley led song and opening credits really is.
Absolutely. This is right in the vein of the Hank Williams Jr. Football theme songs that pervade parts of our minds. Those of us who heard that, and this is right in there, and it's absolutely.
And the current Sunday Night Football song that's done on Sunday Night Football with, I think, I forget who it is, Faith Hill or someone, who's currently singing the Sunday Night Football song now. It's just as ridiculous. Apparently this is required.
I wouldn't know. I quit watching football when the LA Stallions had all their troubles in the early 90s.
A principled stand. Good.
But suffice to say, the mechanics of football and so forth are not really the concern in this scene. And that's probably eye-rolling to people who are looking at this, because I will say, if there's one thing that the film is sort of guilty of, I think Marshall is going to agree. I'm probably learned this from him. It gets really close to being like social commentary issues are right there, and larger things, football, its intersection with politics, the pressures, the players, gambling, drugs, violence, their behavior off the field, all these things that are just the fodder for a million Sports Illustrated articles are all kind of right there. And Shane Black makes them merely just the canvas on which he is going to shoot a bunch of people. And when I was, 17 years old, that's what I was going to the movies for, and this movie is violent in a way that your standard actioner is not. And as I was learning more about how it was produced, early cuts of this film were flirting with an NC-17, which also, let's face it, in 1991 was kind of a hot thing to be talking about anyway.
Right. You wanted that in at least the narrative of your press narrative.
There's no violence in this movie that you haven't quite seen, even in 1991. But the way it is done and the way they cut away from it. And so when people get shot, they get shot in the head. And when they get shot in the head, hair flops or something on the other side. So it's just a slightly more graphic than just bang, 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 and people with squibs fallen to the ground. The violence is a little more focused. And so, but I thought that was cool. When I went to the theater, that was something I wasn't necessarily getting. So I'm seeing a Bruce Willis movie that is doing kind of what the best Bruce Willis movie does, but it's in this other context. I mean, for me, in my brain, this may as well just be Die Hard 3, right?
Yeah.
And I think the filmmakers certainly were hoping that I would think that. So, score one for them.
And as spectacle, the opening sets the tone for the rest of the movie in a really great way. Like, it is memorable. It does what it's supposed to do. It's like really what Shane Black and Tony Scott were great at was this hyper stylized thriller, well crafted. I mean, it is all of those things. It is well crafted. It is hyper stylized. It does look gorgeous on the screen, and every set piece they do is super memorable and actually really good from the standpoint of, like, if you were setting out, and this movie certainly did, to make the apex of the action thriller something that even goes beyond what Lethal Weapon and Die Hard did, it achieves all of that. It is really a lot of the set pieces, a lot of the way it's scripted, the intricate plot. It is fascinating, but I think tonally it's a mess, and some of the things are they're too unbelievable for me, especially. And I think this is where it's key, when they're also flirting with some of the really thematic subjects that are going on. The nuance here is that he actually does a good job bringing some of these, and it's incredibly prescient for a movie in this, like, it brings up all of this stuff that the NFL wouldn't confront for years, and it took more than a decade for the NFL to come to grips with basically using its players as cannon fodder. I mean, it really, that stuff that that and the intersection of sports media and gambling and drugs, all of that didn't explode for more than another decade. This movie hits on all of that in a really, actually very sophisticated way. And yet, if you're doing that, marrying that to something that is like the sort of cartoonish violence and what's almost a parody of an action movie, that's tonally where it's weird for me. And it was weird for me then, and I couldn't articulate it at age 17, but now going back to it, I see what it is. This is several movies at once. And part of it is like, some of the stuff in here is almost like it is an Airplane or Naked Gun parody of an action movie, or it's a James Bond movie. I mean, you think about what this has in common with the James Bond, from the talking villains to the awesome set pieces, including the killer opening set piece, to the ending, to the way the villain, how cool Taylor Negron's Milo is. We'll get into all of that, but it's like, there's part of it is like, this is actually more of a Bond movie than it is a Bruce Willis movie, and it's like, it's totally all of these things at once, and that's what keeps it from being, I think, as good as it wants to be. Because I think it had a lot of ambitions, but it's really kind of 3 or 4 movies in one for me. And it's not good at any of them in particular.
This is where I kind of wish, like, when our fellow podcaster Simon would be here. Because if we were talking about Commando, for example, we could fill an hour saying, wasn't it cool when the truck exploded? Wasn't it cool when he threw 27 guys at the back of the mall? Wasn't it cool how gigantic and ridiculous that gun was? All of these things.
It's all there.
So strange how he and his daughter fed ice cream to the deer, or whatever it is they're doing at the beginning of that movie.
I appreciate your appreciation, not just for Commando, but the Commando podcast.
The movie, check out the Commando podcast. It exists, and Ryan can link to it. But Suffice to say, like, that kind of conversation that happens around action movies, where we just get to kind of enjoy them for how much things blew up. Last Boy Scout is interesting because he tackles issues that I think even now pique the imagination, pique the interest a little bit. And so it's almost the movie's fault for daring to set it against football. Because, you've got Tony Scott, here's a guy, if we're looking at like Top Gun and Days of Thunder and some of these things where, especially at the time, I know that airplanes flying around and dogfighting and all of that stuff against the sunset looks amazing. I don't know the first thing about how an airplane takes off. I don't know how accurate the depiction of the military is. I don't know how many shirtless volleyball games soldiers are allowed to get into. Likewise, certainly not back then. NASCAR is a little more niche than it has come to be. And so with Days of Thunder, but Last Boy Scout, he picked football, right? He picked political corruption. He picked things that people know tons about.
Yep.
And so the freedom for this movie to just be silly and exciting or thrilling against that backdrop, it's going to make people like Marshall look at it and go, well, wait a second, you got too many people on the field for this scene, which we can only control. I mean, our brains are going to see what they see,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, like that, the stuff I did not love about this movie had very little to do. Like that, the first scene kind of set me off, but then the movie, I feel like I know Shane Black in the movies he writes, in the movies he directs fairly well. I don't know Tony Scott terribly well, but I feel like someone really liked chocolate and somebody really liked Spree or Sweet Tarts and said, I'm going to eat both of these at the same time. And you end up with Last Boy Scout. Like the stuff that I think had Shane Black been given the ability to direct this movie, one, it would have taken place at Christmas. Two, I think a lot of this stuff would have been managed in a different way, because I am not sure Tony Scott totally understood. Like, who knows if that first scene was actually written that way, where it was an offensive player. It could have been a defensive player. Tony Scott decided it was going to be cooler to make it an offensive player. That clearly the screenwriters are kicked off the set the minute the movie starts filming. So I really don't know about that scene and if that's what was originally intended, but because it doesn't make sense. But my biggest issue really with the movie as I was watching it was I wanted everyone to shut the hell up. Everyone was constantly like doing these like middle or early high school level jabs at each other constantly, to where I was just like, who thought that this sounded, because they're not good jabs. It's incessant as they're going through the movie.
Wow.
And I just found it incredibly grating as the movie kind of cruised along. It made it impossible for me to care about the characters in a way that and I can see Shane Black having written some of that stuff, but I can also see those two actors deciding they're going to add to the script. And they're going to add stuff as they go along. And I just don't think it played very well.
Both Shane Black and Tony Scott would say later on that the original script was much better than the movie that got made. From all reports, the production of this was a total nightmare. Shane Black, actually, when he sold this script, he sold it for a record, almost $2 million, which at the time was an incredible amount of money to pay for a script. It was originally titled Die Hard, and that
true story.
It was originally titled Die Hard, and someone came to him and said, "Hey, love the name. Can we borrow that?" And they did. Arrangements were made. A different movie got made with that title. Some of you have seen it. It's a small independent picture, holiday picture, some say.
Little known. I'm going to have to rewatch that. Get to that one.
Yeah. So these things are happening, and none of that is that big of a deal. But when it comes time to make the show, to make the movie, they bring on producer Joel Silver, who is, you've got Joel Silver, you've got Tony Scott, you've got Bruce Willis. So you've got these just like, for the moment, big macho dudes who are probably enjoying all the extracurriculars that come with their careers. showing up on set trying to make a movie with this really expensive script, and it becomes just a battle of personalities on set. So Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans, they reportedly can't stand being around each other. They share almost every scene of the film. They are constantly rewriting on the fly. They're changing it. They're coming up with the quips. They're doing whatever. They shoot this movie from about March to mid-June of 1991. The movie's going to come out in December of 1991. So they shot it that spring, and it came out at Christmas. While that movie is being made, while Last Boy Scout is being made, Bruce Willis's other gigantic budget movie, he's made Hudson Hawk with Joel Silver. That movie is released while this movie is shooting. And so it tanks immediately at the box office.
Unjustly, in one man's opinion, I will say, as a lover of Hudson Hawk, but go on.
It tanks at the box office while Last Boy Scout has a couple of weeks, or so left in production. And so the pressure is on amongst all these personalities to try to get a movie made. They finally stopped shooting the movie. They're done with it. And they went through editor after editor after editor trying to get it right until they finally hired someone who came in whose job was to fix unfixable films. And so you wind up with the cut of the movie that we have now.
Which was a hit. This movie was a hit. It was successful.
Oh yeah, it
was moderately successful. For as violent as it is, as far as R-rated as it is, it came out at Christmas, and I don't know. It depends on how you want to look at it. There, you can certainly find quotes that say it would have done better if it had come out at a different time of year, which is probably true. But they made a good 10 tickets off of this guy right here. So, just doing what I can to
at the Dollar Theater. I mean,
I'm just imagining Michael putting down a 5 spot and being like, "Me and all my friends, thank you."
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yes, and getting change back. Thanks, inflation. So what you guys are talking about, that anybody likes this movie, that anyone can watch the beginning of it all the way to the end of it and find pleasure in doing that is a total miracle, right? Because nothing about how it was put together is the right thing. Some of the things that make it, I would say, there are things in this movie that are bad filmmaking. And I would not expect bad filmmaking from the people who did this, but that's what it is. It's because they are desperately trying to find an edit that makes any sense whatsoever. And so when you that's why you wind up with things like a helicopter that appears to be ascending from the middle of a stadium for your big villain kill at the end of the movie. It helps if you don't absolutely defy common sense to kill the big baddie. But there it is. And so you're left with, you can be one of two people. You can be someone who says it's just a bridge too far for my suspension of disbelief. Or you can be someone who says, oh my gosh, Death by Helicopter was amazing. And then the movie was over, and I think Last Boy Scout is a movie that's going to definitely sit in that space. And you just have to decide where you're going to land on that.
It's interesting.
On the right side. I'm enjoying things.
Yeah. I mean, I find it interesting to hear about the editing, because one of my not a big beef, but a beef I have with the movie is, to me, you guys had called out earlier, Taylor Negron's villain in it. That guy should have been in the first third of the movie. He's not appear until the back half of it.
He's great.
That's a total miscalculation. I guess they just had no other scenes for him to be in. There's the really good "If you touch me again, I'll kill you" scene by the side of the pool. I don't know how you get that into the movie earlier, but it's the first time I felt like I was on Bruce Willis's side.
Yeah.
And you're clocking in at over an hour into the movie at that point. The way they've written Bruce Willis to make him, one of these boilerplate 80s, action heroes of got the drinking problem, blah, blah, blah.
Anti-hero, right. Yeah.
All the shit that you get in The Last Action Hero is the punchline, which is, I think, if no other reason, it's good that Last Action Hero exists. It's so everyone would stop doing the same stuff over and over.
Yes.
But we said we were going to kind of hold off on doing some of the social commentary, but he's so misogynistic with his wife and with his daughter at the beginning of the movie that and then he keeps going, but I love her. And it's like, well, you sound like an abuser is what you sound like.
Yep.
So until you get,
we're talking about Bruce Willis's character.
Yeah. And I'm not sure Damon Wayans' character is any better on this stance. And I think that, who knows what Shane Black had originally written in there. I can see a lot of that being based somewhat on what he had, but I think they just took it up way too many notches in the first part of the movie. I mean, the guy shrugging off his supposed quote unquote best friend, as he calls him later, getting blown up after sleeping with his wife. And it's his wife, after this guy's been atomized in her front yard, who she just slept with, is more concerned about what he's going to tell the cops. And it's just, I can totally see everything you just described about the problems this thing had in production and especially in post. All of that, I believe. It makes for a movie that is just, and by the way, I'm not a person who's like, oh, every character has to be super sympathetic and I have to totally be able to put on my fiction suit and imagine myself in their skin. And I've never had any problem doing that with someone who's, the crusty cop who drinks too much. But there was no good thing to latch on to other than you already like Bruce Willis, so you're on board. You've paid your $7.50 to see this movie.
He's funny. This, I think, is maybe like he gets to say like one of the talkiness of this movie, and you're absolutely right. It's very talky. I just thought of that when you mentioned it. Like I really sort of replayed it in my mind. You're right. It's really talky. It's almost like proto Tarantino-y in terms of how talky it is. But I didn't really, that wasn't one of the things where as I'm watching it, I was counting that among the bad things, in part because Bruce Willis gets to deliver tons of jokes that are really good.
See, I didn't think they were good. I
thought they were okay. I mean, I thought they were, I thought aspects of this were funny. And again, part of this was almost like you talk about Last Action Hero being that was the airplane really of this genre. And yet this movie kind of takes that sort of it's doing the same thing. It's got a lot of the self-awareness built. Oh, you're the bad guy. I'm the bad guy. It's got a lot of very self-aware. That's when I could feel the Shane Black coming through. Yeah. Right there. It's deploying these supercharged action movie tropes at the same time commenting on the fact that everybody can see these are like their backstories are ridiculous because they're made to be ridiculous. And so that one of the movies that this was a supercharged parody of an action movie. Like that was one of the things this movie is doing. And you can tell that DNA of that is still there in the dialogue. Where it was doing that, I was kind of with it, but you're right. Where the incoherence comes from the fact that why are these characters so unlikable? It's like Bruce Willis, you see him being an asshole, like not just an asshole, but an abusive asshole to his daughter. And it's sort of like we're meant to go, why is this girl like, why is his daughter like this? Well, because she's been abused. She's only an asshole to him. And he deserves it. He is a fuckface, and or whatever she calls him, a failure or something like that. She calls him something in the movie, and it's like their fight is among the most traumatizing things you see in the movie. And in some ways, it's more violent and abusive than anything else you see.
Agreed.
It's like between the two of them, and it's hard to watch. And how are you supposed to root for this guy? Same thing with Jimmy Dix, who's like almost the first thing you see is he's waking up with someone who isn't the woman he professes to love. He's waking up with like some other stripper or some other like woman, and you don't know who she is either. But the first thing you learn about him is that he's cheating on the woman that he allegedly loves. He's not just cheating on anybody. He's cheating on Halle Berry. He's cheating on the woman who is easily the most like this side of Bruce Willis, the most charismatic, talented actor in the entire movie, other than Taylor Negron, who's also really good. I mean, the three best performances here are Bruce Willis. I think this is peak Willis. I think he's really good. I like him in this movie, despite the fact that he's made supremely unlikable. Halle Berry is amazing, and they kill her off in the first 10 minutes. I think there's two big problems that I have casting wise. One, it's that this movie's way better if it's a buddy movie between Bruce Willis and Halle Berry, and they're the ones trying to solve the conspiracy and trying to figure out, like, kill Damon Wayans and then make her avenging him. To me, that's a much better movie. And then you're like, Halle Berry has scenes in here where she's leaping out of the screen like, Brad Pitt and Thelma and Louise. Like, it's that kind of charisma that she has. She's a star, and they get rid of her immediately. And then Taylor Negron, the same thing. It's like, what is this movie doing? It takes the two best people and it marginalizes them. And that's among the other things that I don't like about this movie. But I just think, it's trying, there's just the incoherence on several levels that you have in this movie. And you're hitting on some of it there. But the miscasting is another of this movie's fatal flaws. It's definitely in my list of the sins of this movie. That's near the top.
Do you think, and I'm going to ask you guys both this, can you see somebody else playing Jimmy Dix?
Well, that's another of the bad. That's another bad of the, like, imagine if that's Wesley Snipes, for example, like someone who can really act, like, and that would have been perfect for him at this period of time. Imagine if that's Wesley Snipes, because, like, you look at Damon, this is by far the most successful movie Wayans has ever in.
Was it not Blank Man?
He's never in another movie that's even close to good. They're all bad. And it's like really bad. Major Payne is a terrible movie. It's the first time I ever saw the stars replaced with a bomb in a movie review. Yes. I mean, he's just, his career, and I feel bad for him because I think he's talented. He's talented in Living Color. I think there's a world in which he has a better career, but his stuff is so bad. And he does the thing in here where he's like, I just don't think he's very good here either. And I know that's not the consensus. A lot of people think he and Willis, despite their interpersonal problems, have really good chemistry in this movie. I don't. I think this movie is 1,000 times better if this is Wesley Snipes. His delivery is stilted, and he does the homophobic thing where he, like, pretends to be gay for a moment. And it's like, that's the thing that is probably if he went back and redid his career, probably the thing he would avoid the most is that kind of the homophobia that's sort of latent in his work, or blatant, I should say. So I think he's one of the other casting things that if I were changing this movie, that would be at the top of my list.
I don't know, man. I feel like Damon Wayans gives a generational performance here, because if you've ever seen a football star or an athlete try to go on Saturday Night Live and be funny, it is stilted and painful and difficult. And Wayans really recreates that for you as a football player attempting to solve a crime in this movie. Yeah, he does the gay dude thing, just so that audiences recognize that he's the same cat from In Living Color, and that he's the same guy from Beverly Hills Cop doing the exact same joke.
Yes.
I will not apologize for that part of this film. I will not try to explain. No, that's bad, right?
Even at the time, I mean, we can go back. I mean, this isn't even like sort of being woke after the fact. Like, even at the time, you read reviews from Roger Ebert, who gave it 3 stars. I was reading that this morning, and like, even at the time, this movie was thought of as like having over the top misogyny and homophobia issues. I mean, this was like, probably not as much the homophobia, but definitely the misogyny. I mean, like that's near the headline for Ebert in his positive review of this film. And so I think that a lot of the stuff that we're calling out now isn't just looking back. I think it's part of the distaste that one could have had for the movie, even in the moment. I won't go back and say that was part of my problem with the movie, because I don't think it was back in the 90s, but contemporaneous reviews called it out. And so I think that's something relevant to talk about. When like there's a lot in this movie that's hard to like, and yet it's still the fact that it's still successful with audiences and still has some successful aspects. I think is one of its features.
I mean, while we're on the subject, does he do that more than once in the film? Is it more than one gag?
I think he just does that. I think he just does the sort of like
he just drops into it real quick, right?
He just drops into it real quick. I think like exactly what Brian said, or maybe you said, like just to prove, hey, I'm the guy from In Living Color, just so you know, this is my thing. This is one of the things you know me about. It is a meme. That is something you remember Wayans for, and I think the Overton window shifted on him, and now people will definitely remember that about him, but it's not to his benefit.
I mean, that's strange. Again. Not apologizing for it, but you think about a movie like Beverly Hills Cop, right? It has his scene in it. Yep. But let's face it. I mean, there are whole sequences where Eddie Murphy drops into that character.
Yes.
So I find it not necessarily interesting that this movie is called out for that, but that in 1991 you're calling out traces of it. That I guess that the tolerance had tapered off. To where, certainly that style of homophobia is not welcome. I'm sure there are millions of other types of microaggressions towards people that were totally accepted.
And I don't even think the homophobia is the worst, but I would say the other misstep that I think is called out here commonly. And again, I don't think in the moment we had a problem with it. I mean, freaking The Lion King had the same issue, right? Why is the gay guy the villain? Why is that the stereotype that you see in that, that I think Taylor Negron, I don't know, I forget how to pronounce his name. His character, I think, is clearly intended to be seen as gay or to scan as gay, and he is the villain. I think it's hard to argue that this movie isn't using his gayness as another element of how sinister he is. I think it is, and
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
And yet he rises above that. He's probably the third or fourth best thing about this movie. He's an incredible villain, and he's really a Bond villain. He's awesome. And he's a much better villain than the owner is. He's technically the henchman. Yeah, but he's amazing in this movie, and probably, to Ryan's point, should have been in the movie much earlier, because he's the one, I think, calling the player early in the film. He's great. And he's a super awesome villain. Probably should have been here more probably, you don't see him until later because we have to deal with all the other bumbling hitmen first. But he's great. But I do think that he overcomes it. But I do think that's another part of this film's sort of homophobia and misogyny that it has. And I'll say this, the other thing that I think you can read into and when it comes to the misogyny of this film that's problematic, it's not just problematic because it's misogyny, it's problematic because of the weird blind spots that it has. Like, and I'll give you a couple examples. Like, one of the things that we see is Jimmy Dix, after he's coming out of cheating on his girlfriend that he loves, he notices the big football guy, like, sort of forcing a woman into oral sex by holding her head underwater, and he breaks in and
in a hot tub,
and we're sort of meant to see that, hey, that's something that our character who we're rooting for won't abide, and it's also meant to foreshadow the accuracy of his throwing arm, but it's like the character has a blind spot to his own misogyny earlier and later in the movie, and the movie appears to share the same blind spot. I guess it's unclear. Same thing with Hallenbeck, right? Hallenbeck is a guy who's like, well, I'm not going to buy this abuse by Senator Boehner to this woman, and yet he's arguably the most awful character towards women in the entire movie. Like, his wife justifiably hates him. Like, we know why his wife is cheating on him. He's a dickhead, and he's an abuser, and he's awful and distant, and he's all of the things she says he is, and he knows that, and then the same thing with his daughter. And so it's like we're meant to sort of see him as like his last Boy Scoutness as being some sort of upstanding, but he can't compartmentalize.
Yeah,
why is the last Boy Scout such an asshole to his own family?
I mean, and this is kind of, Shane Black tends to write and rewrite the same stuff and manage to get it turned into other things. But you go and watch something like The Nice Guys, which kind of borrows a lot of these same ideas, and it's an amazing movie. If you've not seen,
it's really good. No, I like it. It didn't do as well as it deserved to do.
Yeah, and he's able to have the dad who's a shitty dad with the daughter who he's clearly disappointing. All these things, recycled tropes that he likes to use. And you can see kind of like, well, if you do this kind of from Shane Black's perspective, how this ends up actually working versus whatever I think Tony Scott and crew brought to the script once they had it in their hands and weren't able to kind of put that deftness on it and go, look, the dad's actually trying here. Right. That you always get in stuff like The Nice Guys. And so I do think that the movie, to Michael's point, does it have, really good action scenes? I think it's probably worth calling some of those out. I mean, it's part of why I started kind of pointing towards, this Bruce Willis by the side of the pool and that whole sequence, which I that's the thing that leaps out to me of like, man, what a great little sequence that's in the film, including and up to the guy going swimming next to Bruce while he's being beat up and there's a dead guy anyway. But it's there's definitely some other stuff that's good in there. But Michael, do you have any particular favorite action sequences out of there?
Yeah, I will say this about the film as a person who, so I work in filmed media. I don't make movies, but certainly figuring out the best way to put something on a screen is a daily concern of mine. And I think this movie is shot really, really well for an action movie. And I can tell you how many horrible action movies that I have seen. And it's just because they've just visually made the wrong choices or different choices. And this one sort of largely gets it right in a lot of ways. And I think that the scene where Halle Berry's character is killed at the beginning, that goes from having Bruce Willis's character cornered by thugs behind the club where she dances, which is a situation that he will have to fight his way out of, coming around to where Halle Berry is killed. It's all that sort of black rain kind of stuff that the exotic cars are moving through, machine guns, all of that. I love that sequence. I think it's really cool. And the camera is really far away from the action, zoomed in. So you get a very compressed look at what's happening. And it feels gritty. And over and over again, I find that what could be wrote in Last Action Hero is better because of the way it's filmed, frankly. And there is that. But I think that sequence is excellent. I love when our characters they have this tape and they are going to decide what to do with the tape. And before they can, they are approached by two henchmen who are going to come up and talk to them a lot and try to get the tape away from them. Unbeknownst to them, the car that they were about to get into and drive off in has been rigged with C4. They trick the henchmen into shooting the car, and the car explodes, obliterating. There's a lot of exploding cars in this movie, and that's one of them. And
it's worth pausing there because that's one of the best action scenes. Like that's one of the best exploding action scenes in all of 80s, 90s action movies. Like so that's amazing with the way the car explodes and then tumbles, right? And they're like it's awesome.
It's not so just cool that the car explodes.
You're right.
It's that they fall over into the median or the ditch or whatever is next to them, and the fiery car tumbles after them. And so I love that stuff because I feel like
great. There
are action sequences where something happens, but then it just keeps going a little bit more, and that's always really that's just really cool. It is definitely a movie that you can break down into bits and pieces. Like you can show YouTube clips of scenes. Here's this scene. Here's that scene. Totally independent of the context of the movie. You can go, I see that looks like it's probably from a good movie. and arguably strung together, it becomes a lot more convoluted and so forth. But that scene, I mean, I like exploding cars. Apparently,
the car going into the pool.
A car not only goes in the pool, right? It falls from the heavens, into a pool, and
it's still on fire in the pool.
Yeah, just neat ways of doing that kind of stuff, and having our characters be badass around each other. I don't want to go too far back into what we've talked about for the benefit of our audience, but when you look at these people, yes, is Halle Berry electric in this movie? She absolutely is. This movie is 1991. Halle Berry's filmography starts in 1991. So we're seeing, I remember coming out of it, not knowing who in the world this person was. She's beautiful. I'm 17 years old. I'm responding to this person going, I don't know where she came from, but I would like more of it, please, in front of my eyeballs.
Yes.
She's great. Taylor Negron is awesome. I don't get the impression from the personalities that are at war trying to get this movie made that it's the kind of place where they're going to look at each other and go, oh, you know what? These two minor characters should get more screen time.
That's fair.
Somehow I don't see, Bruce Willis making that argument to anyone. And so I don't know, I guess it's a victim of its own success. I guess that it winds up having Halle Berry in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very different era from the era we're in now. You're really in the middle of the Star era. You're in the middle of the period where someone was going to give Jim Carrey $20 million to go be in The Cable Guy. I mean, if Bruce Willis is in a movie, he has all kinds of things written into his contract that say, if I feel like rewriting this whole thing, I can, and he did. It sounds like, and Joel Silver's just going to be one of those notorious Hollywood stories, for the next 100 years. And God knows what he was up to on set and what he was putting in people's heads and in their ears and providing them as party favors. So, yeah, I mean, and Tony Scott too. I mean, that guy was just as notorious. So,
well, going back to what you said, it's interesting. This conversation is wild to me. I've spent almost no time since 1991 thinking about what kind of a husband Joe Hallenbeck is, what kind of a boyfriend Jimmy Dix was. I just that information just reads as there they are. Now I think that when Hallenbeck gets right with his wife at the end of the movie, that feels tacked on in the way it feels tacked on in literally every action movie. That sequence where people are sitting on the back ends of ambulances and we all get to have conversations and run to each other. That happens here. And I think Shane Black attempts to turn that on its head by making it unique the way they do it, but it sucks. It's just not good. But what we do have, I mean, Scott's next credit is going to be True Romance, right? So he is 2 years away from the Tarantinoism, the proto-Tarantinoism that we're talking about here is going to turn into legit Tarantinoism for the world in just a matter of months. And so having this collection of unlikable people who are quipping at each other, who are being hyper violent and trying to bring that together. Now, True Romance is going to have a romance at the middle of it. So you're always going to have people that you're rooting for, even if they themselves are wacky and scripted as such. And Last Boy Scout doesn't have that, right? You don't really get a romance between Joe and Jimmy, but it's almost there. And so, I don't know. I wonder if that's sort of the, if that's retconning this movie too much.
Well, it's worth saying that part of the reason we don't is because this movie mostly avoids race, but it's worth noting that part of the reason we don't have a romance and a sort of buddy relationship between Willis and say someone like Halle Berry's character is because that it really wouldn't. the movies weren't even doing that then. We're sort of having an interracial romance at the beginning, not until The Bodyguard, right? So I think
it's hinted at. They come right out and say it because apparently Shelley Marcone has tasted Halle Berry's character, as he puts it.
Yes,
one of the sweetest whores I ever tasted. So that goes back into the misogyny of the film. There is no woman.
No,
the very few women who are in there are just painted with the worst brushes, And
I admit that part of what I'm going back there when I have those thoughts is what this movie could have been at the cafe. It's me. It's 47-year-old me. But not 17-year-old me. 17-year-old me didn't have those thoughts. 17-year-old me was just looking at this movie going, there's so much that's implausible about this movie, and not just the football scenes, but including like the fact that why is she pulling over? She knows people are after her. She gets rear-ended. What the hell is she doing? So there's a bunch of little things that eat at me when you watch this movie that really bother me. But
does that not make better for you because the character in the movie asks the same question? She pulls over and gets out the car, and he says, "Corey, don't get out your car."
Yeah. No, I mean, I get it. It's just like, it's one of those things where I'm like, it's really hard. I mean, I have the same problem with Taylor Legrand is set up as really being probably the brightest person in the movie. I mean, they managed to successfully frame. I mean, he's framed. He's framed for the murder of the cop. He's framed for the murder of his friend. Like, he's going down for these murders. John Hallenbeck's character, is his name John?
Joe.
Yeah. Joe Hallenbeck's going down for these murders. And yet when the plot with the bomb blows up and they really aren't able to execute that, he's a total dummy. Why does Milo continue on and say, well, now I've got to kill him? There's no race to kill the senator. The senator doesn't have to be killed at the game. What is the pressure to kill the senator coming from? He's not voting on this for in the immediate future. Like, what are we doing here? He's like, he continues the plot. He needs to collect his losses and go home. And yet the movie says, well, now I'm going to shoot him in an even more ridiculous and obvious way. I'm going to kill him. It is really hard for me to stay with this movie. And that being said, I do take your point. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of 47-year-old me that's probably being too hard on this movie. When you like actually read about it and you sort of go back and you sort of look, a lot of people like this movie. And so in some sense, I'm the minority, but I think that the way it starts set me down on the wrong path with this movie. And I think that's probably it. And there's a lot of 47-year-old me notes that I'm giving this movie. I'm a lot more woke than this movie is, obviously, but that's because of 30 years of time have intervened. And so I get that. There's some things that I have. I think the main problems that I have is sort of already missed. I don't like Wayans in this movie. It's a way confusing and unbelievable plot. And then we don't have enough Halle Berry. I think those are probably my main things. I think there are some good things about this, including, and maybe we want to talk about this before we go, there's some really neat tricks in this movie. There's some awesome movie stuff, including very Bond stuff, like the rotating suitcase in the trunk. That's so cool, and it's so easy to be hard on this movie when there's some cool stuff. The way the car catches fires and the pool is like implausible, but also fun. There's the gun in the stuffed animal where the daughter, it's ridiculous to me that the daughter is like coming in to save the day with the gun, but it's also Shane awesome. Black. It's so cool. That's right. It's very cool. And the way it sets up with this joke, I mean, it's an awesome joke and it's an awesome visual thing. The fact that he saves them because the gun is in the puppet. And that's really neat. That's nifty. The way I would describe that is nifty. The suitcase thing, that's nifty. There's some fun thing. The bomb going off in the distance when he realizes, when he opens a suitcase, and obviously he's expecting to find a $6 million in there, and what he gets instead is a bomb. So I mean, there's some cool things about this movie, and so part of me doesn't want to be too hard on it, especially because I give the movie a lot of credit for being so thematically prescient. And I mean, the way the intersection between gambling, the intersection between like the way its players are driven, And the movie touches on this. And actually, this is a through line also for Shane Black, is mental illness and how to deal with that. And that's a real through line of his work. A theme of his work is the pressure that people are put under in extremely high stress situations and what that does to you. That's a theme of this movie, and the gambling, and especially now. I mean, we're talking about like, why would you think how implausible? Why would I bribe? Why would I have to? This one senator is like, nah, 6 million is not enough. You got to come out with more. Well, we're living in this world now where Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin are raking in record fundraising dollars from people in both parties because they're the swing senators. And so the gridlock and the political gridlock, the NFL, the gambling, all of that is stuff that really wouldn't come to bear in a modern way for decades. And this movie is right on it. And so I think I give this movie a lot of credit for that. There's a lot to like about it, even though I had some big problems with it at the time and still do.
I lost about half of your point right there because I thought you said Christian cinema and Joe Manchin. So I'm trying to imagine how
Christian cinema. That's awesome.
Joe Manchin
Christian
and
cinema.
God's Not Dead or somehow.
Christian cinema, isn't it? Is it Christian cinema? It's funny that her name sounds like Christian cinema. Let me tell you about Christian cinema here.
I agree with whatever you said right there. You, me, and Kevin Sorbo.
Who's the guy from what's the Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron.
Christian cinema figurehead, Kirk Cameron.
Yeah.
By the way, if you ever want to see something true, I will only watch the first 15 minutes, but Saving Christmas is the most unhinged thing I have ever watched. It's amazing. I want to be kinder to this movie just for Michael's sake. And I understand everything you're saying about it's got this and it's got that. And I'm kind of like, yeah, it was a gigantic, expensive film that had a lot of talent behind it. And yet it managed to like pull defeat from the jaws of success for me as I was watching it. And I at the end of the day, you still need some stuff, no matter what all those things are, for a movie for me to work. And the fact that I was wanting the main characters to shut up through 2 hours of the film or however long it is, where you have throwaways like, you're a dumb butt. Oh no, you're a dumb butt. As they're like walking through like the police headquarters, and you're like, that no one needed to be talking.
Not dialogue from the film.
But that was essentially to me the level at which their jibes were landing. And I wish it had not had all the problems it had. I went to that movie in when I was 17 in good faith to go see an act, because I was showing up for everything at that point. That was like, Wesley Snipes or, whomever was going to have lots of guns. I do think that there's just way too much plot for what it is, and it needed to figure out a way to better deliver it. I don't think they needed to streamline it. I don't think it's that complicated, but they managed to make it complicated by very slowly and laboriously unpacking it. They could have had, exposition guy just tell them what's going on in the first third of the movie and gotten on with the action sequences.
Yeah. The question I want to ask is like, again, why are we prone to put this movie under the certain microscope that, I think if you look at other, 80s, 90s actioners, there are sequences and plot bits and all these things that it's no more or less unrealistic than a variety of other things that we just enjoy for what they are. But I do say, when we talk about it being plotty, Shane Black's, for better or for worse, fails to let the MacGuffin be the MacGuffin, to just let football and all that stuff be the excuse for what's going on. But because it's so talky, that's what they're going to end up talking about in the down moments. And so it feels like it wants to be the movie Marshall's looking for. Like it wants to be a movie that's going to take on, they give Jimmy Dix a speech, right? Where he has been busted in Joe Hallenbeck's house, sneaking painkillers. And Hallenbeck throws him out because he's apparently got a zero tolerance for drugs. And there's backstory there, but I mean, who cares? It lets him sit there and tell the story of how his wife and child were killed while he was having the game of his life. And his whole life was taken away from him. And every time he has a drink, he toasts the memory of the child that he only got to meet, moments before it passed away. And so he he blows his knees out, and he takes the drugs and he can't stand the pain. And then they finally throw him out because he's gambling. And have you ever noticed how the NFL has a spread that you can look at, and all of this stuff, like he brings all this up only to have Joe Hallenbeck's character just say, the door's over there. You can, see yourself out. And so we learn things about professional sports in a speech that is meant to inform us that this is more than just the game we watch on Sunday. It's meant to educate us in some form or fashion, but it doesn't mean anything to the rest of the movie per se, and that's what I'm saying when I feel like Shane Black wants to put these lines of substance into the film, but then not really let the film be about those. And so I can see how it feels dissatisfying because it wants to, he needs to just shut up about that stuff and let people shoot each other and make their jokes, and it can succeed or fail based on your entertainment value of those things. So I do hear that criticism, and I do see how that could not work for some people. This was definitely cotton candy, comfort food that I got when I was a teenager. And so I'm always going to enjoy it for that thing. My attitudes about it haven't necessarily shifted, even though my attitudes about, if we want to talk about misogyny in film and the way these characters treat women and the way, and so forth and so on, I am happy to get there, and I would not defend this movie for having done that. That said, if I have the flu and I'm sitting on the couch and this movie's on, I'm probably going to watch it, and I'm probably going to laugh at some stuff, and it's going to feel familiar. I'm going to text my buddy from high school, a line from the movie, and we're going to have a little laugh about it. It's always going to have that effect. I don't know. Maybe I would go back and watch it again at 47, as Marshall is saying, and it would feel distasteful. That has certainly happened. I've attempted to watch, right around the corner from this movie, I've attempted to watch Reservoir Dogs again as an adult person, and I found it almost unbearable. A movie that I know all the words to, that I've seen, I have thoughts, I have sat around probably with Marshall late at night talking about that movie and others like it and how revolutionary they were. And now I can't get through it because those people are so unpleasant, and what they're saying is so offensive to me, and that I don't see it as a fresh, bold new voice in cinema. I see it as something else. And I struggle with that. And I watched this movie and I was like, oh man, I have outgrown this film emotionally and just and the kind of person that I am. That has not happened with Last Boy Scout. Probably because I didn't give it anything more than just like, woo, he said the fun thing and stuff blew up, and they cussed cool. Like, I don't know. So yeah, maybe that's all there is to it. I'd be interested to talk to somebody who had not seen it, who watched it now, to see if some of the more over-the-top elements of it do read more like a tongue-in-cheek parody of the genre, because that's probably not what they were making back in 91. That's definitely not the movie
they
I
definitely
saw
weren't intending to make that.
No, they were trying to make another Die Hard.
The ultimate. Yeah, they were trying to make the ultimate version of that kind of movie, I think.
I think then and now part of, and this will be at odds a bit with with some of what you're saying, but I think that to me, there's a joylessness to this movie that gets really doubled down with, like, the speech about, the car jumped the curb, blah, blah, blah. That's meant to give you sympathy for this character, but as you mentioned, doesn't ever actually impact anything. That's not the only moment of joylessness to me, because the performances and the relationship doesn't gel for me straight through. There's if you want to compare it to something like Die Hard, there's nothing to really cling to. I'm just not having a good time watching these characters go through their business versus watching, the John McClane run around the tower and he gets depressed because he's in a very bad spot, but the movie knows what it is. It's inserting Christmas carols there to kind of go, haha, when you don't take this seriously, in a way that, by the way, Die Hard 2 does not, which is not directed by McTiernan. And I think that this film kind of ends up really, for me, suffering. I can say this. I don't remember the movie at all from being 17 and watching it now as a 47-year-old. And when Marshall was saying this stuff, I was like, yeah, I can kind of see what he's saying about it being a parody. But to me, it just feels like a movie that is not doing what it's trying to do very well. And so it ends up almost feeling like a parody. And I don't think that there's enough of a Dr. Doom threat at the middle of it. I think you don't have an Alan Rickman you have kind of this good old boy who never really seems like much of a threat. And meanwhile, there's also the senator who's playing kind of the same character. And it's just
people with Southern accents suck. That's what this movie is very clear on. Is that these cowboy good old boys are bad because they sound bad.
But I think kind of coming back at it, there's no other way to watch it, right? I can't go back to being 17. I can't go back to 1991. I can very much remember those movies. I am often surprised when I go back and watch movies from 91, how much stuff is in it that I feel like I've outgrown. And to your point, I hated Hateful Eight when I saw it, because I felt like I have outgrown whatever Tarantino was up to. And
I struggle quite a bit with that movie.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, the reason this movie isn't successful is you can boil it down pretty easily, because you have movies in your mind that are doing the same thing and do it much better. And whether that's Die Hard, whether that's Lethal Weapon 1 and 2, because I think 2 is really good. Whether that's True Lies that came out a few years later and really does the over the top action comedy thing.
Right.
That's one of the best that's ever been done in terms of what that is, to even Bad Boys. Like, we've seen this done better before. I like Bad Boys. In my opinion, we've seen this done better before and after. And this is kind of like maybe this is the one of the worst ways I've ever seen it done at this level in terms of what you have hopes for the people who are involved in this. This is Willis. This is Tony Scott. I love Tony Scott. This is Shane Black. Shane Black's obviously had successes. To me, this is a failure because it doesn't live up to a lot of other versions we've seen before. And so I think that's it. And I think the missteps that are there are missteps that feel really bad, especially if you are coming at it from someone who's fairly sophisticated. Like, the plot of this movie is awful because the bad guy has to explain it to you for almost 5 minutes as he gives the poolside explanation for what his whole conspiracy is all about. It's comical even for like a Bond movie, and that's like a trope of a Bond movie. it's just like, what? But Shane Black's script requires that now, because otherwise you're lost. You really don't know what's going on unless telling you, unless he actually tells you what's going on. And it's just, and those are the things that it's like, it's just clunky. It's just, you see the seams here and they're shouting at you. And I think that's an example of why I have such a problem with it. Yeah.
Also, they blew up a 72 Buick Riviera, and that's not okay. That was the car that got blown up and rolled down the hill. And
oh man, but the car explosions are maybe the best thing about this movie. But yeah, I agree. That's a sin.
What good is that car, man? The tape player doesn't work.
Right. I was like, that car is too old to have a tape player in it. It should be an 8-track player.
That was one of the funniest gags. That with the tape player, you know, millennials won't get this now because they don't know what that's like. But that was one of the best gags of the movie.
So I will also say my tape making days of the early to mid 90s and so forth. One of my favorite things to do when making tapes for others was to take a top 40 song that, you know, whether it be like the Bodyguard soundtrack or something like that was just not what we listened to, and something that was just pervasive on the radio, and start my mixtape that way, and then cut into it with some sort of a break, right? And I used the audio from this of fast forward eats the tape, and that kind of sound. Many a mixtape started that way. Was excellent sampling, early sampling fodder for me.
Any last thoughts on this before we wrap it up? I have no idea how long we've been talking. I don't know what time it is.
I'm actually disappointed we don't have more Taylor Negron in the movies after this, because he's really good in this, and one of the things I remember the best is how good he is in it, and he really has a more limited movie career than just if I had watched this. The two people I want more of into the future, and of course we get plenty of Halle Berry, is Taylor Negron and Halle Berry, and it's kind of a disappointment we don't get more of him in the movies afterwards.
So he's passed, right? Taylor Negron?
Yes, he passed away.
Yeah, my memory when he passed was the other actors in LA were very kind of like bent out of shape about the fact that he never really got his shot. Like, people liked working with him, and people really thought he was great who worked out there. And somehow he just never quite clicked as, you know, someone who was getting cast all the time. And I agree. I mean, I think he's absolutely fantastic in this.
Yeah, he's the standout. And yeah, that, you know, as we were speaking earlier about why these characters didn't get more screen time, you know, I think that's understandable. But yeah, why they weren't cast in the next thing, you know, why Taylor Negron wasn't cast in the next thing, or why Tony Scott didn't just add him to the roster and stick him in everything in some form or fashion, is beyond me. Who even knows? And Halle Berry, obviously, just electric, extremely charismatic. I think she's good at this kind of character. I don't think that Halle Berry is gonna. I don't particularly think she's that gifted of an actor. And you know, but in the right roles, there's none other. And I think that's a case of what's happening here. She gets to show so much more than what the character is given, which is like, oh, you're just a blackmailing exotic dancer. And even in her limited space here, she's allowed to be more than that. If there's one relationship you understand, it's why Jimmy is like drawn to her, and his inability to remain faithful to her is part of his stuff that's going on. Mm-hmm. So all of that kind of is interesting, you know, but the movie ain't about that.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it was, to me, watching it this time, I'd forgotten she was in the movie from when I was 17. And when she gets killed right out of the gate, I was like, oh, right, it's 1991. This is pre everybody knowing who Halle Berry is, which I remember by 94 sitting in a class, and it was interpersonal relationships. Everyone at UT took it. It was a 500-person auditorium that was completely packed. And they brought up a picture of what had been figured out at that point via computers of the perfect human face, and it was Halle Berry. And there was much applause from about half of the audience. But yeah, she's very. She's still. I mean, she's in Moonfall, so she's still kicking it. She's still around. It's unfortunate but it was a total shock when she was killed off, and it was like, oh yeah, Damon Wayans has to have some motivation. So
Yeah, now I'm embarrassed to advise any of our listeners to go and watch Last Boy Scout. But if you do, I'll watch it with you. And I can mutter the next line in your ear before it happens.
Hey, we can all watch John Carter together, and y'all can just drag me for 2 hours for thinking this is a fantastic movie. Anyway, really appreciate it, guys. It's been I think it was interesting to revisit. It's a movie I never would have watched again on my own, and to kind of get a chance to. I mean, but that's true of a lot of stuff. I'm not going back and watching Passenger 57, which I thought was fantastic when I saw it in the theater. And so, can you guys see my dog? He's trying to stick his face in the camera.
No, I can't. No, I can't.
Yeah, there he is. But yeah, I certainly appreciate it, and thank you guys so much for hanging in there for what had to have been an hour and a half podcast.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we can do to make this podcast any better and bring it to a close is hopefully you will introduce the music right now of Friday Night's a Great Night for Football.
So true.
Done. That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.